Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Natasha, and today I'm going to talk about the stages of loss in the workplace. So we have all heard of the stages of grief. And sometimes when we think about attributing that to the workplace, it feels dramatic, but I promise you that it's not, because we experience loss in the workplace in a lot of different ways. And we need to acknowledge how that impacts us so that we can show up as our most evolved self. The stages of loss step in when something changes, and this can be any change. Maybe there's a reorganization, or you're even just switching offices, or switching careers, or a change is being imposed upon you and upon your section. And a lot of questions come up, like what happens to me? What happens to my position? What happens to my job? How does this impact my status, my place in this company, my future, whether it's in this company or elsewhere? And this makes people very vulnerable. But we have to acknowledge that when something changes, we are experiencing the loss or the death of an opportunity, of a future career, or of a chosen path. And we need to work through those stages of loss appropriately, because that's really what's going to help get us back in the game. So the 5 stages of loss are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So let's jump into these. So first you have denial. And when you're in that place of denial, you're thinking, this can't be happening, right? There's avoidance, there's confusion, there's shock, there's probably some fear starting to seep in, but you're just in this place where you're like, this cannot be happening, it's too crazy, it's too weird, or it just doesn't make sense to me, right? So I'm in a place of denial. From denial, you'll move into anger, and anger, that's where you'll feel a lot of that frustration and irritation and anxiety. And now you have realized that it's happening and you're like, I can't believe this is happening. And from there, you're going to move into bargaining. And bargaining is where you're struggling to find meaning. You're probably reaching out to others and be like, here's what really happened. Or you want to tell your own story. And, what about that person who did this or this? So it's really this trying to make sense for yourself where this balance is, or where this is quote unquote fair. After bargaining is depression. And this is where you've done all this bargaining and now you're like, I can't do anything about it. No one can. You'll start to emotionally disengage. You're overwhelmed. You feel helplessness. You'll also probably feel a lot of hostility and flight, like you just want to distance yourself or not be a part of a lot of different things. And then finally, we have acceptance. And in the acceptance stage, you're now exploring your options for this new opportunity or this new phase. Whether that's a new office, like I said earlier, or a new plan, whatever it is, you are moving on from that disruption that change caused in your life. So you're like, what's next? I want to note that there is a newer stage that has been recently acknowledged, and that's stage 6, which is meaning. And this is where we find the lesson or the meaning in what happened. So I want to kind of bring all this together, and I'm going to share my story. So I had been in an organization for a long time, and when I started there, I was like, I'm going to the top. I want to impact and add value to all these people. Like, I am in this. And I read every manual, everything about the manuals, everything different leadership within the organization wrote or suggested reading. Like, I was in it. And then as time went on, I learned more about the organization, and while I wasn't thrilled with what I learned, I figured you're never going to like your job 100%, which is true. So I was like, hey, an 80% solution is okay. But I could feel this frustration building. Probably about 8 years in, an incident occurred where there was a senior individual who decided to randomly move me to another position, even after knowing the negative impact that would have on me and in that current organization. And that for me was the breaking point. I was absolutely in denial, like, this is not happening. And then someone else in the organization called me and said, hey, this person is being sent here to replace you. Do you know him? Do you know what's going on with all this? And it was in that moment that my denial melted into anger. And I wasn't just angry about that current event. I was angry about the last 8 years. Every little thing, I was so just like rawr about all of it. And I was gonna put all of it on this one event. So when I reached the bargaining stage, I had reached out to multiple people across the organization in trying to tell my story in an attempt for them to listen to me. But that proved pointless, so I moved into the depression phase. And I'm a pretty active person in the workplace, and I'll usually take on any project. You could even just whisper that something needs to happen, and I'm on it. So it was surprising for me to experience in myself and for others to experience from me when that pendulum just swung the complete other way. And I did not care. And I couldn't even make myself care. But then when I got to the acceptance stage, it really was like a huge weight had been lifted off. So there were still those who tried to knock me off course. But what was so interesting was having gone through all those stages and let myself feel that and be in those while I needed to, it made me plan this new course. I had this new course, this new plan in mind. And that plan did not rely on them or need the input of the people who had knocked me kind of for a loop there. So it was, and it is exhilarating to know that once you get through that, even though going through it is awful, it is, on the other side, it is exhilarating. It is empowering. So I was also able to move from acceptance into meaning, where I could really appreciate the lessons that I had learned in my time in that organization. So even today, I am so grateful for the experiences, both positive and negative, and especially the people in that organization, because they have enriched my life in so many ways. So as a leader, how can we use this information? We need to acknowledge when we're working through the stages of loss, and don't let it spill out onto other people. Right? This is your process. So let yourself go through it, but don't put it upon other people. Second, we need to acknowledge when the people around us are experiencing this. And instead of trying to talk them out of it, like, oh no, that's not how this was, let me, go explain. No, just let them go through it, right? Like I said, it's when you're going through it, it's your process. And when they're going through it, it's their process. And they're gonna get to that other side, but it's gonna be in their own time. Also, this process doesn't mean that someone is gonna leave an organization. It sounds like, you're going through all these stages of loss and you're like, and at the end, I'm done there. But sometimes it may mean just a new way to be in your current position or organization. And that's the other reason why allowing yourself to go through these stages and accept the loss of something that you were expecting or that you were working for or working on is so empowering and so valuable, because then you can get to the other side of it and you can show up in a new way. Thank you for listening to the Equipping Leaders podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha or on Twitter at Natasha Cheyenne. Please join me next time for more insight and resources to equip leaders.